Hello everybody, this is Graeme Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Explorers. Now Explorers is a flip and write game. That means you're going to be flipping over a card and writing something on your player board map. Now your player board represents a new world of levitating rocks that are constantly moving, and this is the first time you've seen this configuration. So you're going to set out to explore the new world. Now of course you are going to be competing against your fellow explorers who are seeking this land's treasures. Now, although I am getting a little tired of roll and write games, and I tend to be picky about which ones I play, only because of the quantity that have come out recently, but when I saw this was a Phil Walker Harding roll and write game, I figured I should check it out as I have enjoyed many of his other games, and he has designed Silver and Gold, another good solid roll and write game that I really enjoyed. So, will this be a fantastic new discovery, or should be left buried and forgotten? Let's get it to the table, see how it's played, and we'll come back with my final thoughts on Explorers. So here we have Explorers set up for 3 players. Each player has a board and will add the scoring tiles across the top. All players should use the same side of the scoring tiles. Now I should mention here that there are expert rules where you can pick different scoring tiles and you can add achievements to change up the gameplay, but I'm just going to be showing you the basic setup. Next, the first player chooses 4 terrain tiles and places them to the middle of their board. All other players take the matching tiles and place them in the same orientation. The terrain is now split up into 4 sections, A, B, C, and D. Each player then marks the village that is the closest to the center point of the map with an X. This is where everybody's journey is going to begin. All players will then pick one terrain type, prairie, water, desert, or mountain, and mark up to 3 spaces with an X, and each X must be placed to either the starting village or a previously placed X. Since we are playing with 3 players, you're going to cross off the 10 under each temple. For 2 players, you're also going to cross off the 6. Now the goal of the game is to get the most victory points over the 4 rounds. At the end of each round, you're going to be evaluating the scoring tiles to receive points. During the round, you can get a key to open up a temple in a certain quadrant, and the earlier you get those, the more points they're going to be worth. And finally, at the end of the game, you're going to be scoring points for how many spaces with an X are marked around a village. So the game lasts 4 rounds, and each round contains 7 turns. At the start of each round, the 8 exploration tiles are shuffled together, then you're going to discard one face down. At the start of the active player's turn, turn over the top exploration tile. The active player will then pick one of the 2 terrain types. Then all players will draw on X's in empty spaces, and you have 2 choices. You can place 2 X's on the same terrain type that the active player just picked, or you can place 3 X's on the terrain type of the tile the active player did not pick. Now there are some rules for placing X's. It must always be placed vertically or horizontally next to an existing X. New X's do not have to be placed adjacent to each other, and each placed X must be on the same terrain type, with the exception of wild tiles. If the active player turns over a wild tile, they will have 2 pairs of terrain types. The active player still selects which side of the tile they're going to mark as active, but when marking X's, you can choose either of the 2 terrains on the chosen side of the tile. The heart of this game are the special tiles on the board, which are going to activate when you cross them off. The key, when crossed off, you're going to circle one on the top on your board. When you use it to open a temple, which I'll talk about in a bit, you're going to cross off the circled key to show that it's being used. A scroll. You circle a scroll on your player board. On a future turn, you can cross out a circled scroll to ignore the exploration tile completely and just place 4 X's on a single terrain type of your choice. You still have to follow the same standard placement rules. The horse allows you to place an X on any terrain space following the normal placement rules. Provisions. You're going to cross out the corresponding provision on the provision scoring tile. Now there are 4 columns representing each round. You can only cross off the provisions corresponding to the current round. This tile is going to score every round, and I'll talk about that during the round scoring. Gemstones, cross off a gemstone on your scoring tile, and again these are going to score each round. A temple. You can place an X on the temple if you have an unused key. Cross out the key, place an X on the temple, and circle the highest available score in that quadrant's temple scoring. And let all other players know that you've done that, and they will also have to cross off that on their player boards. They will no longer be able to claim those points. Villages. Now you cannot put an X on a village, but at the end of the game, you're going to be scoring points for X's next to villages. Now the current turn ends when all players have placed their X's. Then the next player becomes the active player and turns over the next exploration tile. After 7 turns, the round ends. Players will then look at their provisions and gemstones. For the provisions, you're going to score 1, 5, or 10 points for collecting the 1, 2, or 3 different provisions during that single round. For the gemstone tile, you will count the total number of gemstones you have collected since the start of the game and score that many points. Gemstones obtained in previous rounds still count towards the current round total points. The game ends after the 4th round. Add up all the points from the provision scoring tiles, the gemstone scoring tiles, the temple scoring, and finally the village scoring. Now for the village scoring, you count up the number of X's next to each village on the map. Diagonals are not included, and score 3, 5, 7, or 10 points for having 1, 2, 3, or 4 X's next to a single village. Do that for each village, you add up all the points, and the player with the most points is the winner. Let's get back to see what I thought about Explorers.
So let's talk about the theme and components. This is a flip and write game, so the theme is pretty thin. But for what it has, it actually works reasonably well. Unlike many of the other roll or flip and write games where there's zero theme, this one actually works a bit. You are exploring and you're marking up your map, so it makes thematic sense. I thought for this style of game, actually a good job was done in the theme. So let's now talk about the components. Again, another good solid piece of this game. The boards work well, and I like that components were completely interchangeable. I found the map tiles, they're easy enough to read, and the terrain and the special squares are easy enough to distinguish. But I do wish that these were a bit bigger. The pieces themselves are nice thick cardboard, so no issues with inserting or removing them from the board, and they clean up very easily with just a cloth. Overall, I thought the components were well done, but again, I do wish that these were a tiny bit bigger. On to the gameplay. And there's really not much here that we haven't seen before in other flip and write games. Now, I do like that the active player gets a choice in which terrain to place their 3 X's on, and the other players, again, get a choice too. But the game still feels very much like a solitaire game. Beyond the temple scoring in the base game, there's really no player interaction. When you're the active player, you're always going to pick the terrain side that's the most beneficial to you. There really didn't seem to be much point in looking at the other players may or may not want. It's just about all terrain is going to be usable by them. Now the race to the temples did give you some tension in the game. And this might be where you look at other players' boards to make sure you're not going to be focusing on the temple that they're going after because they may be closer to it. But the other items on your player board, like the provisions and the scrolls, they're kind of your own and really don't affect the other players. I did like, though, that the addition of the expert rules, the ability to maybe switch out the scoring tiles. Now, again, there's not a big difference in these scoring tiles, but it did offer some variety. The achievements, which offer more ways to score points, are again something to change the game up a bit. And I do feel that this was needed. I found that after the first several games, I felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again. Yes, I know this is a flip and write game, but I found that I was approaching the game the same way and it started to feel repetitive. So adding 1 to 3 of those achievement tiles maybe changed it up a bit. I do think that one thing that helps other roll or flip and write games avoid this is the fairly constant combo hit. Like when you cross this off, you get a bonus over here, which allows you to complete maybe the section over here, so you can put an extra 3 in your board, for example. This game doesn't have a lot of that. Yes, there are the horses that act like that, but nothing really gives you that immediate hit. There will be several turns in a row that you might be doing nothing but just expanding your map, or maybe storing something up for later. It's not bad, but it does mean that adrenaline rush from completing something or getting a bonus are few and far between. It's definitely not game-breaking, but I felt after several plays I was missing that from the game. And honestly, coupled with the fact that the game is not overly random, yes, the order of the tiles coming out is random, but you know what's in that pile. It's the same for every round, except for the one removed. You know that if you've seen 3 mountain tiles this round, you're not seeing a 4th. So I felt maybe I was missing a bit of that push your luck or the risky element from this type of game. Now, I also enjoy that every game had me at some point saying, how'd you get over there already? I like that most of the time people were taking very different paths on your player board, so it's maybe not obvious to say the first thing you should always go for is X. But with that said, you do end up doing a little bit of everything. So eventually, although their paths may be different, most players collected the same things. You can't really focus on just getting temples or just going after provisions. So everyone just does little bits of everything. So would I recommend Explorers? I think I ultimately would. This is a fun flip and write game, one that gives you something a little different and fits right in the middle of the complexity zone. It's not a super simple game of this type, but it's also not overly difficult. It fits nicely in the middle. I like that this game was fairly easy to teach. Flip over a tile, draw some X's, and you cross off one of these few things, you get a bonus. It does make it more approachable than some of these other games with this type of mechanism, which in short is definitely a good thing, but I think in the long run, it actually ends up hurting this game. Now, I'd also like the variability of the game, the choosing of the landscape tiles and the different scoring and the achievement tiles. Again, they're not wildly different, and they're all variations on the types of scoring in the base game, but I do appreciate that they're there. Now, some of the achievement tiles do offer up some more race elements, like the first person to get 4 keys gets the maximum points, which I liked as it tries to introduce some more player interaction into the game. Now again, because this game sits in the middle of the complexity scale for flip and writes, I do feel that it ultimately suffers from it. I did find that after several games, I was missing the combos of the games. I also found that the scoring tiles were different, didn't really change the approach I or anybody I played with was taking. You kind of ended up getting little bits of everything. And this is compounded by the fixed draw pile. You know what's in there, so you're never going to be getting 6 waters in a row during a round. Yes, one scoring tile makes it more important to get gems, but I was going to do that anyway because they score every round on their normal scoring tile. I found that there was nothing that was bringing me back to the game. It's not so simple that I would suggest it's a game to play while waiting for food in a restaurant, for example, but I was also not engaged enough in it turn to turn to want to get it back to the table repeatedly. I almost wanted it to have some more combos or bonuses that I could use right away, or maybe some other randomness. Overall though, I still think this is a solid game that I enjoyed playing, so I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Yes, I did find that I eventually found the game a bit repetitive, but if you can play a game several times before that happens and the game then gives you ways to change it up a little bit, I think it's still worth playing. It may not be my go-to flip and right game for me, but I will happily add it to my rotation for this style of game, and I'll enjoy playing it when it does hit the table next. And that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.